Welcome to Being Authentic AF. I'm Alexis Franzese, a university professor, licensed psychologist, speaker, consultant, and mom with over 20 years of experience studying authenticity. This season explores what it means to express your authenticity and to express it authentically in your work, art, and everyday life. It's for anyone who wants their voice and presence to align with their values and seeks to deepen connections with others, from audiences to colleagues. Through reflections and conversations with creators across different mediums, we'll share practical ways to put your inner work into motion. You'll hear about actionable frameworks for authentic self-expression, and we'll explore themes like intent versus impact, honoring the medium, vulnerability with boundaries, access and context, and why iteration beats perfection. Join me as we explore how to know yourself, be yourself, and evolve yourself, and then express it and keep expressing it, unlocking the path to truly being authentic AF. Welcome to Season 2 of Being Authentic AF. I'm your host, Dr. Alexis Franzese. This season is all about how we express ourselves authentically and how we express our authenticity. I'm here today with Tina Langevin. Tina is a powerhouse vocalist, educator, and performer whose career spans opera, musical theater, rock, and heavy metal. She holds a master's in music with dual concentrations in voice performance and vocal pedagogy. In addition to performing with the North Carolina Opera and the Wilmington Opera, Tina fronts and sings with Black Orchid, an all-female tribute to Black Sabbath, Heart Brigade, a tribute to the music of Heart, MGB, a variety cover band, Crimson Steel, an original new wave of traditional heavy metal band, and Wrath of Sirens, an all-female tribute to metal. Welcome, Tina.
Thanks for having me.
Tina, I am so happy that you're here today. And to start, I want to ask you about the fact that you have performed with doing opera, heavy metal, rock. You do it all. And which of those experiences feels the most authentic to you, or what is your authenticity like across those?
I would say metal feels most authentic, and with that I can just really be expressive, and it's also kind of environment too. It's very dramatic. A lot of the metal that I perform, Crimson Steel is original music, so there's really no expectation on how that should be. So I'm able to just express myself however I want because I'm creating it. But definitely metal. Opera is very similar in a lot of ways. When I first started training formally, I just wanted to learn to sing, and I wanted to be educated and just do better with my singing performance. But then I was introduced to opera, and I realized it's dramatic. It's all the things metal is. You know, there's a story, and there's ups and downs, and it's all the things. So although it's a different genre, there's still some genuine expression and feeling in that. So metal's probably the one I draw closer to, but I do love all genres.
When did your interest in metal start?
When I was about 12 or 13, I was introduced to metal through just friends, like, listen to this, or have you heard this? And I just loved it. I loved the energy, the emotion in it. Yeah.
And when did you start performing?
I was 16 when I had my first band performance. I was probably 12 when I performed for the first time, and that was at a middle school talent show.
Wow. Do you remember what you performed?
I performed Save All Your Love by Great White, and I was so nervous, and it was actually a turning point for me. I was playing clarinet, and I was playing a little guitar, and I didn't really know 100% singing was the route for me. It was just I was playing music, and I auditioned for the talent show late. My teacher was very supportive and encouraging and let me in. And I remember thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do during the solo, because I'm just going to stand there and what's going to happen. And by some stroke of luck, those tall flags that schools have in their auditoriums fell over. And there was a commotion during the solo, and then it was all done, and I was able to sing, you know. But afterwards, my friends came up to me and they were crying. And I thought, wow, you know, and this is true. Like, I thought, wow, you know, this really reached them a little bit deeper than I expected. And that was probably my first time really realizing the impact of music.
That's really interesting, because one of the things I wanted to ask you about is when you're performing, do you have a sense of the authenticity of your performance as something you internally experience, or is that dependent on how people respond to your performance?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think if you're genuine in your performance, then the audience feels that. I think if you're just not feeling, you know, the vibe, and you're just kind of going through it, if you show that to the audience, they're going to feel that. They're going to see that. Like, and like the same thing if like you're in a band and the chemistry's not working, I feel like the audience sees that. But it also does kind of come back to the energy from the audience. If they are, you know, either receiving the message, you know, if it's sad or happy or whatever, and experiencing that with you, it can build the intensity. And, yeah, so it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah. And when you were talking about having that experience at 12 or 13, that was really interesting to me, because what we know about authenticity is that these questions of the true self, of if we're doing what kind of feels real for us and genuine, or we're kind of shifting our behavior to what's expected of us, those questions start to be experienced around 12 or 13. So it's interesting that you had that really powerful experience right at that time. So when you think about authenticity, how do you define that, or how do you consider that within your own life?
Yeah, I think about that a lot as a person who writes songs, or, you know, performance in different ways, musical theater, opera, you know, live performances with bands. So for me, it's just being genuine. It's doing things not because you think someone else is going to like it. Sometimes it's really hard not to do that. Like if I write a song and I'm like, oh, you know, who's going to like this? But then I think being authentic is saying, well, that doesn't matter. I like it, you know, and I'm just going to put it out there because this is what I like. This is what I want. Yeah. So I think being genuine and finding parts of things that you like. Also, you know, sometimes we're going to do things that are different. You know, maybe you have to dress a certain way or do a certain thing that has some kind of structure to it. But I think it's more about not being authentic when it has a negative impact or a negative feeling to you. Yeah.
That's a great point, because I think that there are things that are at stake in being authentic, and also things that are at stake in being inauthentic, right? Because if you know, the research even supports that if you put a false self out there and that false self is received to acclaim and favor, you're not even going to internalize that warm reception because it didn't feel like it was actually you.
Right.
Interesting things to consider. So I want to go back to opera. So you started with metal, right? And then what was the next genre that you had a foray into?
So so I'd have to say, like, my first band I was ever in was like a cover band. I was 13. It's around that age, right? Which was weird because these were adults and they were like, I don't know about this. You know, this is a child here. But they...
You mean your bandmates?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And
okay.
But then they agreed. So it was kind of weird. But then I was getting into like Led Zeppelin and things like that. And then I kind of went to heavier metal, which I loved. And then it just, as I grew up, I just started experimenting. There was a time where I was like, oh, it's only metal, you know. And as I grew up, I started to really expand what kind of music I liked. And I really think it was when I went to college, you know, that I really opened up to all types of music.
Yeah.
And before then, though, I did get into musical theater. And so I guess it would be like metal to musical theater to opera.
Which feels like it's not what people would expect or predict as your journey. Yeah. And what's interesting to me is that you're still so actively involved with all genres.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to doing the cover band music. Mm-hmm. And what is that like for you in terms of authenticity? Are you trying, when you perform doing covers, to kind of simulate what the artist did originally, or kind of bring your own flavor to it? What's that like for you?
Yeah, so this is something I think about as well. I remember there was a time I posted like a meme, and it was like maybe Ella Fitzgerald or someone like that who was quoting about being yourself through the music. Mm-hmm. And someone commented on that saying, "But don't you sing covers?" And I feel like that's such a narrow perspective, mm-hmm. because yes, I'm in a cover band, but I still feel the music. I can still feel that message. Right. It still can relate to me, mm-hmm. even though I didn't write it. And I try to express that as I sing or perform to the audience. I may not have written I Will Survive, but I can definitely relate to some of that, you know. But I do try to stylistically incorporate things that's going to make the music authentic, because that's a whole other thing. When you're dealing with styles, one of the things I say is, are you singing it authentically? Are you singing opera with the stylistic characteristics that you would need to identify it as opera? Or are you singing pop with stylistic characteristics, you know, or blues or whatever? You know, you have fries and growls and trills or you know, all these different things that make these styles kind of come alive. But I think one thing I try to teach as a voice instructor is these are tools. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you have to be this way. Like, I try to say, if a student is using vocal fry or glottal onsets, do you know you're doing it? If you do, great. If you don't, let's talk about that. This is something you could use it for. Here's all the tools you have. You make the choice, right, in the end.
Right. That's really interesting, because that would be a way that person enacts their own authenticity mm-hmm. in the performance of that. And you're really bringing light to the fact that when we think about music and performance, there are so many layers of authenticity within that. You know, mm-hmm. there's being in alignment with the style, like authentically conveying that, but then also bringing your personal flavor, which I'm sure is a bit of a complicated process to do that. Have you ever created music that kind of felt really authentic to you, but received feedback that people didn't experience it that way? Or has there ever been any kind of disconnect?
As in, like, maybe they didn't like the music, or they didn't feel it was authentic?
Maybe if you, like, received feedback that they didn't experience it as authentic, or people felt like your heart wasn't in it, or anything like, any experiences like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure at some point that's happened where maybe I was like, yeah, I was really feeling that. And, you know, maybe a professor or someone didn't see it that way. Yeah. And I think that's also perspective. You know, one thing I try to remember is everyone's different. Mm-hmm. We have different, everyone is operating on a different mental level, brain waves, all the things. We see things differently. We hear things differently. We process things differently. So it's really hard to expect everyone to receive a message or understand something. And I think that's why I always, like with my students, when I tell them to come up with a story behind what they're singing, I always say, it's you, it's your story. You know, don't try to think, well, this is what the artist meant or the composer. Like, where are you in this moment? Mm-hmm. Are you in a room? Is it night, day? How do you feel? Who are you talking to? Everyone's different. Everyone has different perspectives. So if someone does perceive something as not being authentic, I think that's their perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what do you see as the difference between something being authentic and something being original?
I think original versus authentic. Authentic being, you know, you've put out this idea or creation, that you stand behind, you believe in, no matter what the consequence is.
Mm-hmm.
And then being original could be, well, you created this idea, but maybe you shaped it a little differently than you would have liked to have put that out. Because you can have original ideas, but format it a little differently for the environment that you're in.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like there are expectations about who gets to perform certain types of music? Is there ever music that you've been performed where you felt felt like it was being conveyed to you that you didn't belong in creating that music or performing that music, or that you didn't have legitimacy in that domain?
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
Especially classical. With classical, the audience is different, and in opera, the audience is very different. I feel like they're a little more involved, and they know the music more than... It's kind of one of those things. Everything's an argument, because I could argue the same thing with contemporary and pop and rock and all that. But in classical, they're expecting you to sing a certain note a certain way, and without any deviation from that. They expect their arias to be in a certain key and to sound a certain way. As it's very, while some artists do take some liberties with it, it's not going to be extreme. They're going to sing with authentic style, right? So as a rock singer going into school learning classical and opera, often I would be told, you don't sound like this. You don't sound like a classical singer. You need to work harder for this, or you need to do this to sound like this. And it would at times make me feel like, can I do this? Which eventually I did. But it, especially like competitions, the judge feedback would be, this sounds pop, or this sounds like this. So it would make me feel like, do I belong here?
How did you push through that?
I just don't give up that easy. Even probably sometimes I should, but no. I loved the music. I love learning. I'm definitely one of those lifelong learners, and I was challenged. And because I loved the music and I was finding this new world, I wanted to keep going and I wanted to get better. Yeah. So it wasn't something that I didn't want to do. It was something I felt I just need to get better at this. Yeah.
I'm curious if there are parts of yourself that you choose not to share when you perform.
When I perform, you mean emotionally or physically?
Yeah.
Or
is there anything you feel like you hold back, or do you just put it all out there? Like, is that part of your process to just bring all of you?
That's a great question. So, other than classical, I do put it all out there. I am now beginning to do that with classical as well. And that might just be an artist's journey, because I had this idea of, this is what they expected. But now I'm like, well, this is what I'm going to give you, because as I'd mentioned before, if you're not genuine or authentic in what you're doing, even though maybe you're singing Puccini's music, and Puccini had this definite way that, this aria needs to be sung, you still have to put your feeling and emotion in that. Sometimes I even tell my students, like, don't be too perfect, because, don't feel like you have to sing everything perfectly. Be you. In the end, that's what matters.
Right. I like you're naming that as an artist journey. I think it's also a life course journey.
Yeah.
I'm noticing as I get older that I just have a greater willingness, or perhaps less of a tolerance for not sharing parts of myself that are important to who I am and how I think about myself. Is that something you feel like you have experienced too, or? Yeah.
Definitely. I'm definitely going through that transition of, this is what I want to present. And I don't like it if I don't present that, which is then not being authentic. you know. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely something. I think our relationship with authenticity evolves over the life course. And, there's a lot of conversation about authenticity. And oftentimes I notice that people talk about it as if it's this fixed thing that like you excavate your true self, you dig it out, and then you find it, and then the task is just to live in alignment with that. But I really think authenticity is dynamic and evolving. And what authenticity looked like when you were 15 is different what it looks like at 25, 35, 45, 55, and beyond. And that part of our work is to figure out how to express ourselves authentically throughout the life course. Because what I found in my research is that when we don't express ourselves authentically, that comes with some mental health consequences. And on that note, do you feel like the ability to perform and express yourself authentically contributes to your wellness and contentment in life?
Yes. Yeah, I think being able to perform and feel like I'm giving my all, and that definitely gives some satisfaction, whereas if I'm performing under someone's direction and they won't let me out of that box, that doesn't feel satisfying.
Yeah. And being personally familiar with the way that you do vocal instruction and having seen some of your students perform, I feel like you're going to be modest and not name this, but Tina, I think you do a really beautiful job in supporting your students in presenting themselves in a way that is authentic and genuine and in alignment. I've watched some of your students perform and they look surprised by themselves, pleasantly surprised and delighted with themselves at the end of their performances, which I think is really awesome. So I want to ask you who your authenticity heroes and role models might be.
It's kind of strange. I can't think of any right now.
Any musicians that come to mind as authenticity heroes or role models?
It's kind of strange. I cannot think of any. Isn't that terrible? I don't know.
Okay.
Right now, I should.
That's just fine. I mean, we all have the people that we...
No, let me actually say Ann Wilson.
Okay.
I love Ann Wilson. One thing about doing a heart tribute is you kind of dig into that person's life.
Yeah.
And I'm, portraying Ann Wilson. So watching her journey, she has, to me, I believe she's authentic. Everything I've seen in her performances, she gives 100%. And I really believe she feels the music. And she feels what she is doing is putting out there. Now, I agree there's probably like in the 80s, the industry was kind of dictating what they were doing. But even she will say she was not happy with that. It was a terrible time. But even like her appearance, her everything about her, she just keeps going. She has obstacles, but she still puts herself out there and she keeps going. Recently, she just overcame cancer. And she is now performing in a wheelchair because she had hurt her arm. Wow. Anyone else maybe would have canceled those shows. And there's an argument on every side, right? So some people maybe felt she should have. But she said, I'm just going to do these shows. I'm going to go out here however I need to. Yeah. So I feel like she's very authentic.
So that's really interesting that the connection you just named to the hardship and the challenges, because I feel like people underestimate the fact that knowing who we are and being in touch with our authenticity actually can be something we can lean into and leverage when we have life's curveballs. Like that's just something that we can rely on when we know who we are. I think it's a different form of resourcefulness. Like it facilitates resourcefulness when we actually understand ourselves and think that our needs, our wants, like we see ourselves as legitimate and figure out a way forward leaning on that. I'm curious if you think there's any kind of ethical imperative or mandate for people to be authentic. Do you think that we owe that to each other?
I don't think we do. And this is just coming to mind right now. I think that, it's great to be authentic, and sure, let's default to that. I think that's great. But I also think that there are situations where you have to find, being authentic in that situation.
Absolutely.
So like, I'm going to give it a simple thing: going to work. Maybe you have a dress code, right? I don't feel that because you give in to that dress code that you're not being authentic, and that you should owe it to me to come in and dress the way you totally expect it to. Everyone's different, right? And I'm not saying people should conform either, but I don't think that you're doing disservice to the world and others by
that's it.
that.
I think we're on the same page there. And in fact, I think that there's a danger sometimes in people, in fact, using the language of authenticity and actually weaponizing authenticity to justify, I'm going to use the term bad behavior broadly, like, dress code is not a specific example, but sometimes people do things that are inappropriate on the grounds of, well, I get to be authentic. This is me being authentic. But the reality is, authentic doesn't mean that you don't have a filter, that you just kind of say whatever comes to your mind. Authenticity is actually, the way I'm thinking about it, really intentional and values aligned with what really matters to that person. And so I think that we can be authentic within the expectations of the social environments we're moving within, and within that dress code. How can you bring yourself and express yourself within that dress code that's required? So that's your response is really interesting there.
Okay.
And then I'm curious if you think that everybody has equal access to being authentic.
I don't. And this goes, I'm thinking outside of the United States. I'm thinking worldwide. While I'm not extremely educated or informed on all cultures, I would assume there are cultures that are very strict and would not allow people to be authentic or show that side of them.
I certainly agree with you, and I think of authenticity as a form of privilege, that not everybody has equal access to enact that, and not everyone's in environments in which they can bring their values and express their values within that environmental setting. I'm curious what hacks you have to keep yourself authentic, stay true to yourself.
Yeah, I think by kind of like what we had talked about in finding yourself in the situation that you're in, not completely hiding who you are. Also, it kind of goes back to, are you expressing or doing things that make you, that you feel good about? Are you doing something that you don't feel good about? I think if you're in a situation where you're like, this is just not good, like I hate this, then yeah, that's a problem,
right.
And sometimes people find themselves in that situation for whatever reason, so yeah, I think that would be my answer to that.
Yeah. And that involves checking in with ourselves and really being honest with ourselves about where we're at. Because lots of us, I think, push through things that we don't really love sometimes, and checking in about that.
What comes to mind is I often tell my students, what is your level of success? Some people want to say, oh, I want to tour the world. I want to be a famous rock star. That's their level of success. Maybe a level of success is teaching voice and performing and doing things like that. Like, it doesn't mean you're not being authentic. It doesn't mean you're not successful if you're not at someone else's expectations, right? Also, sometimes as people get older, I never would tell anyone that they can't do what they want to do unless it's just like physically and something they couldn't do, or neurologically or something. But I'll have students come in and they'll say, oh, I just think I'm too old. And I'm like, well, you're in the wrong place, because I'm not going to tell you you're too old. There's, as long as you're here, you can do it, or at least try.
Yeah.
I'm totally for all of that. But yeah, not to go around too much, but I just feel, yeah, you know, you're not too old. You're not, there's not these limitations that you have to set within your environment. You know, maybe you have to do things differently in where you are right now, but you can still find that authentic self. You can still find success. You can find ways to be happy. Yeah.
Closing things you'd like to share about authenticity, or anything you'd like to name before we wrap up?
I can't think of anything right now other than, you know, I think that was probably the biggest thing. It's just really, and I'm not saying like stay stuck in a situation, but as you're evolving as in a performer, musician, person, just, you know, tell yourself, you know, this is where I am today, and these are the things I'm working with, and I'm working towards something greater. You know, that's kind of how I also approach my students.
I love that, Tina, because that has both self-acceptance and the view for self that anything is possible, all rolled into one. So we will wrap there. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Being Authentic AF. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our series wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep being Authentic AF and let that authenticity uplift and inspire others. Take care.